Hello everybody and welcome to Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. I'm Jack and today we're going to be taking a look at the online tournament results of the past week. Obviously we did a video yesterday on the Brisbane results, but there's still been 9 tournaments with over 100 players in the Brilliant Stars format over the past week. So we thought it was definitely worth looking at these results as well because obviously it's not just one tournament that will be impacting the metagame. Over the COVID era, we've had so many more online tournaments. There's now like a real reason to be looking at these results and seeing whether they influence IRL play as well. So we definitely think it's still important to be taking a look at some of these tournaments results too. Just before we start though, make sure you check out the Potown store where you can get 5% off your order using code OMNIPOKE. You can get Brilliant Stars codes ready for PTGO and PTG Live to come out and all of the tournaments coming up as usual. So, first things first, the first tournament we're going to be having a look at is the Gazer Beam Tourney of Dreams number 4. Yeah, I know, like I say, all of these tournaments had over 100 players. Looks like this was a top 16 cut. You can see that there's a few different decks here and there. I'm going to try and go as quickly as possible through a lot of these lists just because we have so many to talk about today. But yeah, you'll see the same list popping up over and over again. I feel like the online tournaments are there's so many online tournaments, people are a bit more free with what they want to play. They can try out other stuff. It's not all on the line. So typically, we saw in Brisbane yesterday, it was 4 Arceus decks and 4 Mew decks. You can already see, moving into the top 8, there's some other decks in here. So I think it's definitely worth noting that I think online tournaments in general will have a bit more of a varied spread of decks because there's less on the line. It's not, the big regional tournament. So that, obviously, keep that in mind looking at the results. But yeah, as you can see, Mew did well again, as per usual. Mew, mirror match in the finals. We had some Arceus decks in top 4. A really quite varied top 16 overall, though. A few more Arceus decks, a few more Mew decks. But, we've got an Ice Rider, Rapid Inteleon, a Zoro box there, another Arceus build, another Ice Rider, even Durant making another appearance as well. Glaceon finishing just outside, as well as a couple of other cheeky decks here and there. So yeah, kicking these off with the winning list. This was the list that won the whole event. This was actually surprisingly similar to Natalie's list. This was a week ahead of the tournament that Natalie won this weekend. But this was surprisingly similar. You can see just the heavy emphasis on double turbo. No Psych Energy, so therefore no fogs. Palpad is kind of the only card sort of not necessarily expected a lot of the time, where you can see that the Rotom phone count is the thing that's been cut in comparison to Natalie's list. You've got the phone that Natalie played, again, really helping with the Duraldon matchup ideally, but also being useful in a couple of other matchups anyway. But yeah, I think Palpad is the most sort of out there card. Palpad's a card I've tried. I've enjoyed moderately, but it's like nothing huge. It's won me some games here. It's been drawn early game and not been able to use here and there. So yeah, it's not the most impactful card. As with basically any tech in Mew, it's basically one of these cards that you just want to see in the bottom 50% of your deck rather than the top 50%. If it's in the bottom 50%, you're gonna get really good value out of it because by then your deck is super thin. You're really gonna be able to pay off with the power pad because you're gonna very likely draw into the supporters you need. But if it's in the top 50%, you can end up missing out 3, 4, 5, 6 cards off of Genesect across a couple of turns and missing combos like Sparkle and Power Tablets here and there. So always have to debate things like that with cards like Power Pad and Echoing Horn. But yeah, other than that, a pretty standard list all in all, winning the event. We can actually see the second place list was a catcher-based list. Typically, the catcher-based list is meant to be better in the mirror, just because you have the ability to play these cards that just... you still get to boss, quote-unquote, on the turns you Sparkle, and typically that's been a lot of people's go-to mirror tech. So interesting seeing that the catcher build didn't win the mirror. Obviously, it's a flip-based card, so you can never really rely on it, but typically they've done quite well into the mirror in the past. Again, no Rotom phones, just happy with the crams. Interestingly, one point of note about the first list was it was playing Oricorio. Oricorio is a really interesting one, as I mentioned yesterday in my video about Natalie's list. Basically, should that be the list that a lot of people play, I think Oricorio is a fantastic tech, just because it means that your Mew VMAXs need one extra power tablet to be able to push through to get a KO on another Mew VMAX if you're playing double turbo and they're playing Oricorio, because you're at a -40 and that does translate to essentially 1 extra damage mod. And I think that's actually very impactful, to be honest. So, yeah, interesting to see. We'll have to see how Oricorio sort of goes in and out of lists over the next week, but I think it's kind of a 50-50 for a lot of people at the moment. But yeah, you get to, flex a little bit of space with a boss and stuff here and there if you're playing the catchers, but in general, you're still having to play a lot of the typical cards. You're still having to play a high support, high stadium count, etc., all that kind of stuff. So yeah, looking, like I say, skimping out on the phones in favour of the crams, to play the catchers, to try and win the mirror, and obviously try and have other very, very powerful turns. Unfortunately, I didn't do too well in the mirror, I guess, but again, it is a flip card. Still can do some very, very powerful things, so don't hate them at all. Next up, we have the Arceus Duraludon list. Again, nothing too crazy, just worth noting here, mainly that it's the sort of quad Pokegear build. I mentioned yesterday that I think Pokegear is a pretty solid include. I still think, to be honest, if Arceus Duraludon gets more popular over the next week due to its success in Brisbane, 1 or 2 Hyper Potions can be really, really impactful for the mirror. But other than that, I feel like the list is pretty closed down now. A lot of, basically from here, other than the 3 Arceus V-Star, basically up until the Rotom Phone count, this is a pretty standard list. Second Mustard was played in the Brisbane list. This is just playing the 1 Mustard. And then it's kind of cheated a space for the stadiums. But in general, this list is pretty compact, pretty on the money for what a lot of people are playing. This time going for the emphasis on the Pokegears here. But yeah, again, a pretty standard list. Nice to see it doing well again. Like I say, I'm happy to see Hyperpots in here if possible. But, you do have to make cuts, maybe like a Pokegear and an Arceus V-Star or 2 Pokegears or something, which is obviously eating into consistency a little bit. Top 4 was an Arceus Stonejourner deck. This is a deck that Joe profiled on the channel late last week, I believe. Essentially looking to kind of do the same thing as Duraludon, but instead of being immune in some capacity, just running Hyperpots, Lucky Ice Pot, Stone Energy, all of this kind of stuff to become... to have so much healing, you can out-heal your opponents. So that's a follow on Twitch. That's an interesting strategy. I still think I prefer the immunity strategy, but we've seen that evidently it's not the strongest strategy. There's another one. It's not the strongest strategy going into the Mew matchup now, especially if they're starting to tech the Echoing Horn. So whilst the Echoing Horn kind of encompasses this matchup as well, I think typically these decks are going to struggle a little bit more just because now... Because they run the same kind of idea as the Duraludon deck, I think they all get swept up by the same techs, which is unfortunate because I think, for me personally, the Duraludon having immunity to Special Energy is stronger than just having Stonejourner with 360 and a couple of Stone Energy here and there. But still, obviously, it was able to do pretty well. Nothing too spicy about the list, to be honest. You have to play... similar to the Duraludon, you have to make some cuts here and there to try and find all of this healing space. Lucky Ice Pot and Hyper Potion obviously have to be added in over things like higher stadium count here and there. So yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of the deck personally. I still think Duraludon is a better kind of tanky build of Arceus if you're going to try and do that. But yeah, it's one that we've profiled recently and has been doing pretty well, to be honest, here and there. So definitely try it out if you want to play something like Duraludon, but obviously, maybe you don't want to play the immunity. I think Stonejourner doesn't bring too much more to the table overall, unfortunately. But you do get access to things like Stone Energy and stuff, and you can become... This essentially becomes like a 400 HP Pokemon, right, with a big charm and 2 Stone Fighting Energy. And that's pretty tanky, especially if you're then able to have some good RNG with the Lucky Ice Pops and heal a lot of it off here and there. So yeah. Oh, you also have Fighting typing into the Arceus decks as well, which is... hopefully helping those and meaning that they're not too much of a headache as well. So yeah, pretty interesting stuff. Zorobox placed top 8. This is pretty similar to the list that has kind of always been... there's not too much change from the list that we initially had on the channel. Playing the Metal Wormadam... Well, playing a variety of different attackers. But Metal Wormadam was one that was never in our list initially. Obviously, the... popularity of Ice Rider very much depends on how much you want to play Wormadam, but this is the kind of deck that just plays random one-offs here and there to try and tech for specific matchups. So clearly this player decided that Ice Rider was relevant enough in the format to play a tech for it. And honestly, it's a pretty good one, to be fair. You only need like 12 Pokemon in the discard pile, or sorry, 13 Pokemon in the discard pile, which isn't unheard of, to be honest, and that's even less with choice bands. So yeah, that's kind of the whole idea of the deck. Obviously, Weezing is another include that I don't think was in our initial list, but obviously has been discussed quite frequently since. Weezing is hoping to try and bring back some percentage points into the Inteleon matchups, in particular the Suicune matchup, because that was one of the deck's hardest matchups overall. So yeah, that's trying to persuade some percentage points back into the favour of this deck in the Inteleon matchups, while you know, build up some other attackers that can go 1-for-1 here and there, kind of trying to stop them ever getting into the game, so that you're able to do the whole kind of first prize thing, which a lot of these one prize matchups end up coming down to. Things like Flapple and stuff can be still pretty good into the Drizzle and Inteleon engine anyway, especially if they're playing 2 prizes, because Flapple will very rarely not be taking 2 prizes if they're playing the big Inteleon sort of chain engine. So yeah, you can kind of stall behind Weezing to begin with. Other than that, nothing too fancy. Basically, the deck is just trying to pick and choose its attackers right for the metagame. You've got the Wormadam for the Arceus builds. You've got the Metal Wormadam and the Weezing, which I've just mentioned. You've got Flapple and Gliscor just for some really solid damage. Not just into Mew quite nicely, but not just into Mew, into a lot of different matchups as well. And then you've got the Moltres for the late game swing into the VMAXs. So yeah, it's a deck I still haven't tried. It looks like a lot of fun though. I still think it has a very narrow window of decks it wants to see. But it's definitely an interesting one, and it looks like a lot of fun. It really does. So even if I don't get to try it before Liverpool, I'll definitely be trying out after, just to have some fun with this one. Next up, we do indeed have an Ice Rider. Pretty standard list, to be honest. Nothing too crazy about this list. We've kind of seen a variety of different Ice Riders here and there. But again, back to basics, just playing heavy Ice Rider, heavy Inteleon, 1 Suicune for some tempo. Melanie Engine with Paths to try and slow down the Mews here and there, though more and more we're seeing that Mew really does not look like Path does not look like the best way to counter Mew anymore. So yeah, it's an interesting one there. I'm not sure whether that's the way forward. Marnie Path is obviously definitely a way to try and slow them down or stop them. But with the rise of Rotom phones here and there, it does make it a bit weaker. We saw that one of the Arceus lists played by Mitch this weekend was playing the Judge, so I could definitely see this kind of list adopting a Judge to try and get around the whole Rotom phone to protect yourself for Path. I don't hate it at all. I was a bit reluctant on it to begin with, but I think it's pretty solid, to be honest. It's just fine. It still uses a bit of a disruptive tool, and you have Inteleons off the back of that to try and dig yourself out of any awkward Judge situations that you end up putting yourself in. Tool Scrappers, excuse me. Tool Scrapper is an interesting one. Looking at this list, to me, I think essentially this is for big charmed Arceuses. The list isn't playing Leon, so with any choice belt, Max Lance is capped at 280, which means any of these Arceus builds that are playing Big Charm plus Sharon, you're really going to struggle with. So unless you get double ping out and try and do it all in one turn, Tool Scrapper at least is another out for you to be able to not have to play this awkward Leon and try and weave it in here and there. In this case, you can just get rid of that and just go for a choice banded Max Lance to try and take out the Arceus, which I think is a way more feasible way of trying to deal with some of these big charmed Arceuses, to be honest, because the whole Leon thing did feel like a bit of a dreamer moment here and there. So yeah, I do like the Tool Scrapper, to be honest. I'm going to grab a drink because my throat is killing me. So yeah, other than that, like I say, a pretty solid list. I think the Tool Scrapper makes sense. Everything else seems to be pretty good, to be honest. The ball search count is always a weird one in these Inteleon decks, and I'm still not sure where my head is at with how many ball search cards I want to be playing in an Inteleon build. Some amount of Evo Incense and Ultra Ball is definitely right. I still really like 4 level ball just to find outs to Sobbles and Drizzles because it feels like they're the backbone of the deck. Evo Incense kind of works, but I would like to find space for at least 1 more level ball, I think, if it were me personally. But yeah, other than that, pretty solid list overall. And then finally from this tournament was a Rapid Strike Inteleon. This has started to gain a little bit of traction, to be honest, recently. A couple of people have been doing well, and a couple of people have been sort of building up the hype behind Inteleon, which has been pretty interesting. As you can see, the top line of the list is pretty standard, but then you've also got the 1-1 Urshi and 1 Medicham V in here, which is really interesting. In closed deck list format, I could actually see the Medicham being a real surprise to someone who wasn't ready for it, especially in combination with the quick shooting Inteleons, of course. Obviously, you have the whole Cheryl package as well. Playing the Quad Path the Peak as well as another deck is a deck that kind of gets away with that because you're playing the Inteleon engine, but you're also playing Octillery. You don't really care too much about the, I think it's Double Gunner as the ability on the Inteleon. You're playing a couple of waters, so it's accessible to you, but you're not really that fussed if you don't have access to it. I think the waters are actually more in here to be able to not have to waste 2 Rapid Strike energy on an Urshifu. We'll get to the point later on in the video where we'll be discussing Jolteon, because that did really well in a tournament this weekend. So I think the Urshifu is probably getting a little bit worse because I think everyone's going to be teching Manaphy again. But honestly, Urshifu is a really, really solid card against a lot of these Arceus decks, especially if they are disrespecting the Snipe decks and not playing Manaphy. So I really like the idea of having an out to a deck that can just pressure you kind of similarly to... These two decks are kind of just two-shot decks, right? They're both just trying to two-shot each other, but the difference with this one is the difference with the Arceus deck is they do more damage and you take less prizes against them. So this having the Urshifu means you're able to leverage the matchup in another way, as well as just that Medicham to be able to, you know, kill a Dunsparce or something here or there, which is pretty interesting. Sobbles as well, all of that stuff becomes live and available to you once you've got your Inteleons online as well. So yeah, really interesting deck. I really liked the deck before it came out in Fusion Strike. I then really started to struggle with the deck, so it's interesting to see it kind of popping up again. I'm not sure how big this will become. I think again, especially with Inteleon being weak to lightning, it means Jolteon is a bit spooky right now. The list definitely has to adopt its own Manaphy, I'm pretty sure, just because I think otherwise Jolteon is going to put you in a pretty good spot. Even if you're healing off all of this damage with Cheryl every turn, they're going to be able to deal with your engine so efficiently. And they can play their own Cheryls if they want as well. So again, you're running essentially the same deck, but they're dealing with your engine way quicker than you are, and then all of a sudden you can't Cheryl anymore. So yeah, I think this deck has a lot to be worried about, but it's interesting that it's cropping up again here and there. So yeah, try and find space for a Manaphy. Probably maybe have to look at cutting the Rapid Strike Urshi just because of Jolteon's existence. But I do like the Medicham still. There are still a lot of Sobble, Inteleon engines around, which means double quick shooting plus Medicham can still gain you a turn here and there, which can sometimes be enough, especially when you're one of these decks that tries to out-resource people. So yeah, an interesting list for sure. So that was the first tournament. Luckily, we don't have as many decks to talk about in each of these. The next tournament was the Late Night number 30. And as you can see, it was another win for Mew, but we've got a couple of other decks popping up here and there. The only deck that I'm not looking at today of this lot is the Jolteon list, because basically I'm just saving Jolteon for the end for the event that it did win. But in general, you're seeing a lot of familiar faces here. You've got the Arceus builds, you've got the Ice Rider builds. Yeah, in general, again, pretty standard stuff. Looks like we had another Zorro box making it all the way to the final, all the way to top 16, I should say, as well. But yeah, eventually being won by Mew as per. The only super notable thing in this list is just the Peony. It's a card that has been mentioned here and there as a tech. I don't hate it, to be honest. It's an extra out to Stadium. It's an extra out trying to find power tablets on these key turns, especially in the mirror, when you're not really bossing or sparkling or anything like that. So I don't hate it at all. Again, it's never a card you want to see in the first 50% of your deck, but the fact that it's also a complete hand reset as well for Genesect is pretty nice. So yeah, just one additional out for Stadiums, plus just a soft reset for your hand to be able to just start turbing through the deck again. I think it's the best 7th supporter you can play, in my opinion. So yeah, a nice, interesting one there. Playing the Fog Crystal Psychics, again, no Rotom Phones, and again, the Echoing Horn. So it looks like Echoing Horn is becoming more and more standard in Mew, which is interesting for sure. We have an Arceus Inteleon list that I believe came second. I think this was the second place list. I can't remember whether it was the second or third. But yeah, essentially doing the tanky Arceus thing with big charmed Arceuses and Path of the Peaks, and then the Sharon's Care trying to pick them up. Also playing the one-off Farfetch'd with Leak Lash that does 20 plus 10 for each damage counter on your opponent's active Pokemon. So this is kind of the one prize answer to, or the one prize option to trying to finish off something that the Arceus has hit into. You can leave your board with basically 0 2 prize Pokemon if you want to as well, whilst also taking a KO with the Farfetch, which is pretty nice. I think a lot of the time you're still going to need another Arceus down unless you're winning the game with Farfetch'd. But yeah, it's an interesting one. I'm not super sold on it. I haven't been able to test it out too much. I've only played the list pre-Farfetch'd inclusion, so I don't know how useful it was on the day. But I can see having a nice one prize option, potentially, again, in a closed deck list tournament where you're just able to pick up your Arceus with Sharon's Care, pop the double turbo on, retreat, and just go for the Leak Lash out of nowhere. When you may be expecting them to not have access to another attacker if they haven't been able to find another Arceus or anything like that. So yeah, definitely an interesting one. Other than that, again, super standard list. We're starting to see a lot of these lists really get refined now. Managed to fit in the bucket, which is, again, basically the only card I wanted in my list when I was playing it. I was pretty happy with the list other than not having space for a bucket. The Luminion is definitely interesting. I think with the Drizzile engine, it's not necessary to have Luminion, and it also feels super bad when you start it because essentially there will be situations where it feels like the only 2 prizes you want on your board is one that has 310 HP. But you can actually shuffle it back in with, I think the attack is Aqua Ring. In combination with Melanie and Double Turbo, you can actually get it off the board. So it's not the most terrible thing in the world, to be honest. It's at least, accessible to you mid-game, and it's not a complete detriment. But yeah, other than that, pretty standard list overall. Next up, we have Arceus Malamar VMAX. This was an interesting one that I think finished, I believe it was top 8, I could be wrong. But yeah, Arceus Malamar VMAX. Again, Malamar trying to really punish the one or the dark weakness of Mew, as well as having a bit more tankability, being a bit more tanky than some of these 2 prize options like Galarian Moltres V. Still playing the Galarian Moltres though, just to try and have options to be able to have an extra attacker here and there. You can see that the whole idea with the Quad Marnie, the whole idea was just to Marnie Max Jammer and try and take away outs to the opponents, doing powerful things in... That was something exciting. Basically, trying to take away options from the opponent. You're going for a Marnie Max Jammer, putting him down to a 2-card hand, even with a Path of the Peak, potentially on the board as well. So that can be pretty detrimental, to be honest. The biggest thing that scares me is just only having Barbarrel as draw. I still feel like Inteleon is so important in a lot of these Arceus decks. Despite it being slow, it feels like it's really important. You're only playing a 3-2 Arceus, so it just feels like there's so many things that you have to see in the early turns to be able to draw fairly well throughout the game, especially given that Malamar doesn't really draw anything itself. So it feels like you're very reliant on getting Bidoofs down early, very reliant on that turn 2 Starbirth, and if either of those things don't happen, things start to get a bit awkward. Is playing the double E-switch, so Moltres can power things up out of nowhere, as well as get powered up out of nowhere if you've had to attach energy somewhere else. So that's really good for being able to do a surprise Moltres play. Collapse and Paths, again, just trying to really play some of these oppressive stadiums to annoy the opponent, as well as the 3 Crushing Hammer as well. It looks like there's a lot going on in the deck, to be honest, I'm not going to lie. And I'm not sure how I feel about that. They are playing the Metaphy as well, as interestingly. I don't know whether this was... Well, this definitely wasn't when the Jolteon list had done well, so maybe just respecting Jolteon on Rapid Strike enough to play the Metaphy in general. But yeah, it looks like there's a lot going on. I think I would want to try and hone in a little bit more on something. I'm super scared of the turn 1s with this deck because basically there's no way to fill your board up with basics other than the Ultra Balls and the Quick Balls and just drawing them. So if you're going first, it does feel like you can have very scary turn 1s with the deck. But yeah, obviously the Marnie Path Max Jammer combo can be absolutely brutal. Even just Marnie Max Jammer can be pretty brutal. So I would imagine that will win games here and there regardless. But yeah, I would be super scared of a lot of the turn 1s with this deck, if I'm being completely honest. So yeah, next up is the Guard Gauntlet Series 1. There's a couple of lists we're going to take a look at here. As you can see, it was won by Arceus Inteleon. Another Arceus list doing well. Jolteons. A lot of Arceus in this tournament, to be fair. There's a couple of Rapid Strike Malleys and even a Mad Party making it through to the top 16 here. But first, we do have the Arceus Inteleon list. Again, to be honest, this is a super simple list. Playing none of the extra... the extra attacker in Farfetch'd or the extra utility in Luminion. Just playing 2 obs of all of the good supporters, lots of Ball Search cards, not even playing the Choice Belt. I do still really like the Choice Belt, but yeah, not even playing the Choice Belt, just playing basically as consistent as you can get with Arceus V-Star. And to be honest, one of the biggest reasons I want to show this list is just because I feel like if you want to try this deck out or want to see what it can do, this is a fantastic list to get going with, because this is as consistent as possible. You can see everything the deck can do. You can really feel how the deck flows with all of the tutoring between Shady Dealings and Starbirth. You can really get a good idea of how the deck works. And on top of that, you can then start looking at adding cards here and there, things like Choice Belt and stuff like that, as and when you need them, maybe cutting down on some of the Ball Search if you're feeling comfortable enough to do that here and there. So yeah, very interesting list. Looks to be super consistent. So yeah, if you're looking to try this deck out, I think I would definitely try this list in terms of just the pure consistency of being able to see how much you can tutor in a turn. It really is very strong. In terms of Rapid Mally, this was the highest placing Rapid Mally list. It was actually a Cincino list with a heavy auxiliary. Still, personally, a fan of the Inteleon build, but I can see why Cincino is obviously preferable. In some people's eyes, you can ditch a lot of these non-Rapid Strike cards, so essentially you get to the point where your deck is just Rapid Strike cards. But just the pure amount of cards that aren't Rapid Strike still makes me a bit queasy with lists a bit like this. Inteleon naturally has so many more Rapid Strike cards in the deck that it feels like the numbers are far more accessible. But just through drawing enough through Cynthia's Ambition and then getting to make do like twice can be enough. Double Rescue Carrier is obviously very important for the Cincino build as well. Also playing the Boss's Orders, I think that's the most interesting card in the list. A lot of people don't expect Malamar to be playing Boss's Orders or even like a Rope or anything like that. So in closed deck list, that can really catch people off guard. So maybe one to try out if you're going into a closed deck list tournament. But yeah, other than that, just wanted to note that this is the Cincino list rather than the Inteleon list. I think we're looking at an Inteleon list later in the video, but if not, I will hopefully be able to pick one out quite quickly. But yeah, maybe it's this tournament by the looks of it. The Liam Kid qualifier was won by Rapid Strike Mally, beating out Arceus Inteleon in the finals. Again, a couple of Mews here and there. Eternatus, Jolteons here and there. Even a Whimsicott making it all the way through. I'll actually grab this Whimsicott list as well to have a look at. But first things first, we'll look at the Rapid Strike Mally list. I thought it was, again, just a regular Rapid, just a Cincino Rapid Mally. Playing the one Metaphy I think is very interesting. Playing Battle VIP passes is the biggest difference between this list and the last. I actually like the VIP pass in the Cincino list just because you can make do them away for free later on. So that in combination with Call for Family is very nice in terms of trying to set up the board. So yeah, if I was playing the Cincino list, I really would try and weave in the Battle VIP passes, just because even just finding one or two, even just finding one in the early turns to get you those 2 extra Pokemon can be enough to be able to start drawing through the deck, which is very important. Eternatus, this is the highest placing Eternatus of most if not all of the tournaments that I'm going to be looking at today, so I want to take a quick peek at it. Eternatus, again, looking to be as consistent as possible. You can see lots of 4-off counts. One of the most interesting things is just the shopping centre stadium count. Basically, we don't have a great stadium for Eternatus right now, but it needs to play high stadium just because Path and Collapse Stadium are so popular right now. So high shopping centre, choice belts and air balloons are the tools of choice. Can't really complain there. I still don't think it's the strongest deck or the strongest dark... Well, I don't think it's the strongest dark deck out there right now. But obviously it did fairly well. It's one of those decks where actually, if it's disrespected, it can surprise people. But I think in general there are stronger dark decks out there, to be honest. But obviously, again, this is just leaning on the fact that it is a dark type. You get caught in the crossfire of a lot of these decks playing Zapdos, but as you'll notice, there's been no lists playing Zapdos so far today. So maybe it's not too much of a worry. But yeah, I'm still a little bit skeptical about Eternatus' place in the tournament, but I did see a statistic today saying it had overtaken a couple of decks into the top 8 best played decks over the past week or something, in certain parameters. I can't remember what those parameters were, but yeah, potentially worth looking into. And yeah, Whimsicott V, I didn't actually spot this list when I was going through these tournaments, so we'll take a quick look at this. Looks to be a lot of energy denial for hammers to fans as well as path. So I guess you're essentially trying to get into Trick Wind, and then once you've got into Trick Wind, you're trying to stop the opponent ever actually being able to attach the special energy, and then getting rid of all of the ones already on the board. Interesting. Off the back of an Inteleon engine, still feels a bit awkward having to attach over 2 turns other than the turn you get to Raihan. So that's not nicest. I think Fluffball Star is an interesting one for finishing Pokemon off. Interesting V-Star power, but it's definitely not as powerful as some of the others. Yeah. Also gets caught in the crossfire of people taking for Ice Rider if they're playing things like Zamazenta here and there. I mean, Special Energy is huge right now, so you can see trying to push on that pressure point is pretty interesting. The scariest thing about Whimsicott is the fact that Mew can still just LSS Sparkle and attach Special Energy that way. So, yeah, you really do have to make sure the path sticks, I guess. Otherwise, I feel like they're going to have a pretty good time against you overall. 160 is a lot of damage for 3 energy, though. Yeah, interesting stuff. I'm not sold, but I can see why 4 hammers, 2 fans, and then Trick Wind plus Path to the Peak can be pretty annoying. So yeah, maybe try this one out if you're looking for another kind of denial type deck. I don't think we have very many denial decks right now, so yeah, maybe worth trying that one out. The Full Heal Standard 4 is the 5th tournament we're looking at today. 4th or 5th tournament we're looking at today. Again, won by Arceus and Inteleon, with Tapu Koko Arceus was actually the 2nd place list. We'll take a quick look at the Arceus list just because, again, looks like it's playing the Manaphy, playing the Farfetch, playing the Luminion, only playing 1 Sharon's Care, so playing the Power Pad, I guess, trying to squeeze some space here and there in terms of basically, I remember Mitch saying on yesterday's video that he wanted 3rd boss, he wanted 2nd Sharon's Care, he didn't have space for both, so he cheated a space by being able to play Power Pad. I don't hate it. I still think Sharon's Care is so unbelievably important that sometimes you just need to draw it. But I don't hate just not being able to play all the supporters you want, so getting extra space back with Path to the Peak. Sorry, with Power Pad. Yeah, pretty interesting list. Again, no Ultra Ball is really interesting. It means the only discard outs, realistically, for Melanie are Quick Balls, as well as just Researchers and Scoop Up Nets, which are like pseudo outs. Okay. No Snipey. No Quick Shooting Inteleon as well. Means you're capped at 210, 230. I still like one Quick Shooting personally, but Shady Dealings is so important for the deck. And to be honest, when you're playing this many one-offs, it does feel like Shady Dealings has a much bigger role because you're going to need to weave these combos in here and there like that. So yeah, clearly again respecting the sniping decks by popping the Manaphy in as well. Can't really complain about that one. And then this was the Tapu Koko VMAX list that did well. Essentially, in my mind, it's looking to Path to the Peak paralyze people, which again is a pretty strong combo. All of these things sound great. The Path to the Peak plus X combo does sound great, but at the end of the day, we've seen that just Path to the Peak in decks doesn't do well enough against Mew. We've seen that Mew was Natalie was able to play 2 stadiums in the stadiums this weekend and still win the tournament. So I don't know whether these are all just sort of flash in the pan ways to try and build the deck, and they don't have a solid strategy against Mew. A couple of Avery in there as well, just to help out in trying to disrupt people. Pretty interesting stuff. But yeah, again, we've still seen no Zapdos in this tournament or in any of the lists so far. So clearly, being fighting weak isn't that big a deal. So Coco's still pretty safe. Again, you can kind of run into that same mentality of playing the 7 prize game because you can make them go through 2 Arceuses and a Tapu Koko or 2 Tapu Kokos and an Arceus. So you can make them go through a lot of prizes, to be honest. And again, just 180 plus paralysis, I guess, if you're behind on prizes. It's pretty annoying to deal with. I still feel like I can't honestly sit here and think that that Mew is a strong matchup just because they play 4 switch outs plus outs to Path anyway. But maybe Avery does enough in the early turns to try and disrupt them and then Path paralyze Avery. I don't know. It feels all very Dreamer to me. Maybe I'm just pessimistic, but it feels like a very big Dreamer play for this to be super solid into Mew. I don't know how many Mews they ended up playing, but yeah. The Sephi Gold Arceus V-Star Week 8 tournament, these tournament names get wilder and wilder, was the next tournament we're taking a look at. Had a Sylveon win. You can see this was a pretty varied top 8 in terms of the decks we usually see. There's actually only 1 Mew make it. There's more Eternatus than Mew make it into top 8, which is pretty funny. A friend of the channel, Ben Raviotti, was able to make into top 8 as well, so congrats to him, of course. Yeah, Sylveon making it all the way to the final and winning the event. It looks like there was a pretty big top 25 was the actual cutoff. So again, you can see in that kind of situation there are a lot of different decks making it. We've got a single strike here, which has kind of not been particularly popular recently. A couple of other Arceus Dark builds. But primarily, we're just going to be taking a look at the Sylveon list. And again, it looks pretty similar to the Sylveon list I looked at a couple of weeks ago. Got the Crobat VMAX in there, which the player of the Crobat VMAX in the first tournament very kindly commented on its usefulness, so clearly that's been picked up. Marnie's Pride is the most interesting card to me because I think Marnie's Pride is inherently quite a weak card. So, yeah, that's an interesting one. I guess a lot of these attackers are 3 energy attackers, so this means you can Rapid Strike or Double Turbo to them and then get an attacker out of nowhere, especially if you've just got the V on the board the turn before. It's a card no one's going to play around, I promise you that. So, yeah, I guess it can create a surprise attacker here and there, which is pretty funny. Yeah, I mean, it looks to be hitting all the right types. It's got the Fighting Weak, it's got the Dark Weakness. It's got Sylveon and Arceus for tying it all together with just some solid damage. 3 VIP Pass. Again, I'm pretty sure the oldest was playing VIP Pass as well, so trying to use them early and then get rid of them with Ultras and Quicks later on. It still worries me, these kind of decks that play VIP Pass without super amounts of draw. Basically any VIP Pass deck that's playing that's not playing Genesect, obviously, because you really just have to draw them in the first instance. So it makes the VIP Pass count really weird. Do you want to play lots considering you want to see it early but then they're really weak, or do you want to play little so that you don't see it very early, which is awkward, but you're not wasting deck slots? That's why Genesect or Mew is able to use them so well, is because it draws so many cards. You do see them frequently enough to be able to bin them off, to be able to find them, and then you're able to cram and get rid of them later on in the game. So yeah, I'm still like on the fence about Battle VIP Pass in a few decks other than like Cincino decks. But yeah, clearly was able to be pretty strong in this format, I guess, in this tournament. I guess being able to get 2 of your attacker of choice out for the matchup is pretty cool, because they can't deal with both at the same time. So yeah, and again, at the time, I still feel like people were probably disrespecting Rapid Strike Urshi or sniping decks in general quite a lot. So yeah, clearly probably quite a strong card in the tournament overall. The Trooper Tour tournament was the next one we're going to take a look at, and there's a few interesting lists making top 8 here. We've got a Shadow Rider, we've got a Gengar. I'm just going to briefly touch on those. But yeah, again, you can see a lot of familiar faces, a lot of Arceus, a lot of Mew. I even saw a Durant down there. This was the winning list. The most interesting card to me is probably the Adventures Discovery. I can't really see where Tool Scrapper is going to come in too useful. I can't think of many situations where the Scrapper maths changes too much. Because right now I feel like the most the biggest thing right now is just big charmed Arceuses, and I can't see how it changes a big charmed Arceus. You're still having to two-shot unless you've had like 2 or 3 turns of quick shooting prior to that and they haven't missed, or they haven't been able to use Sharon's Care or whatever. So I can't see the use for the Tool Scrapper personally. I guess maybe into some of these Suicune decks if they're playing like capes and stuff, but I feel like that's quite niche. Yeah, Capture Energy is another interesting one. I think Capture Energy is one that's going to become quite popular because a lot of the time the most important thing for this deck is just getting set up. Once you get set up, you're able to represent 180 with healing every turn. Starbirth chooses the 2 cards that you need if you haven't been able to do it if you haven't needed to use it in the early turns, which is pretty good. Adventurous Discovery is another interesting one. Really are leaning into the Arceus line, I guess. 4/4 plus Adventurous Discovery. They just want to see Arceus V and Arceus V Star in the first 2 turns. Again, it feels like quite a weak card overall, especially given the deck's playing no Ultra Ball. I'd rather just try and find space for some Ultra Balls because they translate into some of these other important pieces as well. So yeah, I think if I was looking at this list, I'd probably be looking at trying to find at least space for a couple of Ultra Ball with maybe the cut of the Discovery and the Tool Scrapper here and there. I still really like Capture. Evidently, this list or this player was really just intent on making sure they got set up. Adventure Discovery, Capture Energy, 4/4 Arceus. Still, like I say, I want Ultra Balls. I think they also assist in getting set up, obviously. But yeah, clearly just being devoted to making sure they have 2 Arceus down turn 1, knowing that Mew can very often take one out, so being able to guarantee a Starbirth turn 2 is pretty important. This is the first single prize Dark List we've seen so far, playing a couple of 2 prize attackers as well, playing the Sableye and the Zapdos. I think well timed, they can be important, but honestly, with the rise of Echoing Horn and Mew, I think they are becoming weaker and weaker because it means you can't even discard them in the early turns. And whilst a lot of the time you want to be mining with the deck, you can mine with the deck, there'll also be situations where you want to be researching with the deck just because you need to find multiple Drizzles, multiple energy, multiple attackers, that kind of thing. And the second one of those Sableye or Zapdos hits the discard pile, the Mew player will try and capitalize on that. I think also you sometimes can be baited into trying to go for a Sableye or a Zapdos play, or less so Zapdos, but a Sableye play in that matchup, and then like they just double down, right? They take the 2 prizes on the Sableye. You might take 3 with a Mew, but they take the 2 prizes with the Sableye, and then realistically they can probably Horn and take the 2 prizes on the Sableye again, and it really screws up the kind of idea or the game plan with the deck where you're trying to make them go through as many prizes as possible, make them stretch out the game plan to be able to Malevolent charge your way back into the game later on. Playing double Weezing, I guess just for a lot of these Arceus Inteleon decks, trying to slow them down. I would imagine the deck really struggles against some of those because you're not able to produce any huge amount of damage representation in a lot of instances, especially if they're playing the Zapdos. Though realistically, you can... if they're playing the Dunsparce, your Zapdos isn't doing too much, but realistically you can ping down the Dunsparce, so actually it's probably not as bad as I'm thinking it is. Yeah, you can probably stall them out in the early turns with Weezing, make them have a bit of a slower setup, make them get the Dunsparce out. You can then ping down the Dunsparce over a couple of turns, and then Zapdos to take 2 prizes here and there. You've even got Clara to be able to Zapdos again, potentially. Still can only get 1 energy on, which is kind of awkward though, because a lot of the time they'll only have 2 V Pokemon out, which means that you're going to have to attack for 2 energies. So there will be a point at which you're kind of waiting to be able to do that, unless you're able to Clara to get the Zapdos back in hand, and then right hand the following turn to get it out of nowhere. Yeah, feels kind of convoluted. I'm not sure how that matchup would go. I feel that there's a lot of things I hadn't really considered in that matchup, so I'm not sure where the percentage points are with that one. Yeah, interesting stuff. I feel like this kind of single prize Dark list has been pretty much figured out at the moment. There's not too much flexibility with the list, unfortunately, just because you have to play, because you're a single prize list playing an Inteleon engine, you have to play so many specific cards for specific times in decent enough numbers to be able to find them. You have to play double Clara, you have to play double Moltres, you have to play double Court, just to be able to make sure you can find them for the big combo turns. So there's not really too much room for flexibility overall. Just a quick note on the Shadow Rider list. This was the Shadow Rider that did well. Nothing too unfamiliar, really. Fog Crystals, Ultra Balls, Adventurous Discovery trying to build the board. Arceus, I would imagine, just trying to fill the board with energy. You've even got the Zacian for the early turn. Extra energy attachment. I don't think the deck is particularly strong at all. I think it runs into a lot of issues with a lot of these dark decks that people are naturally trying to play. But I think against some of these Arceus decks, you probably are representing such a two-shot war that eventually you can push through and get there and start one-shotting the Arceuses. I'm not sure whether you can ever do that in time, though. Obviously, because they get to heal and you don't have any healing, essentially you can make I think you're going to struggle to get to a point where they're not able to just sort of boss KO a Crobat or a Luminion. But maybe if you've been able to play without all of those cards and you're just playing with Arceuses and Shadow Riders to the point where you can set up enough energy on board to be able to one-shot with Shadow Rider, it can be a strong matchup. I think in general they're going to have more tempo than you, though, in a lot of cases. Same with Mew. I think they're just going to have more tempo than you. You have three Training Court, but also I feel like you're going to get caught in the crossfire of some of these path decks as well. There's no Pumpkaboo or anything in here, which could easily be included. You're playing heavy Fog Crystal anyway, so I could easily see a Pumpkaboo being popped in just to play around some of the path decks. That might be worth the include, but I don't think the Shadow Rider's in the strongest position overall. Gengar, this was the only other list from the tournament I wanted to take a quick look at. Gengar basically playing no additional draw support, just the 2 Crobats, is pretty wild to me because this deck bricks on me so often. I guess there is additional draw support in the 1 Pyukumuku. How... Yeah, I mean, I don't know how this did for them. Evidently, I guess they came top 8, so evidently the Pyukumuku pulled its weight, I guess. But, you know, I feel like Babarrel is a very important card. Either Babarrel or, you know, just trying to play as many, like, ball search cards as possible. You're playing 4 Quick, 4 Ultra, playing, you know, even, like, cutting the Gengar down to, like, 3-2 to try and find space for even, like, VIP passes or something doesn't feel necessarily incorrect. Just because I feel like if you get into the game, you know, you're in a decent position, but you're basically saying my entire draw is 2 Crobat and 8 draw supporters, right, outside the Pyukumuku. You can't say that I can't imagine the Pyukumuku was too strong. Was it? I can't imagine it being too strong. Maybe it was, but I feel like immediately my heart starts palpitating when I look at this list because I just feel like the deck needs so much draw to get going. When it does get going, it does have one of the best Mew matchups in the format, though, so you can see the draw towards the deck. But yeah, natural sort of heavy breathing when I see a list like this, personally. 2 more tournaments to go. This, I think, is one of the most important ones, the Metaphy Regionals 2K event. This had, I think, over 300 players. So yeah, very, very interesting. I think a lot of people will have treated this as a very important event. And honestly, I think that's why we can see 5 Mew Genesects all the way in top 8, 2 Arceus Inteleons. But Jolteon was the eventual winner. As with all of these decks that have a 1-card counter, things like Decidueye and stuff, I expect this will mean that a lot of people start respecting Manaphy a lot more. I think that's very warranted. I think Jolteon really struggles in a format with a lot of Manaphy, but people just weren't respecting Manaphy, or weren't respecting Jolteon, so they weren't playing the Manaphy. Obviously, the Marnie path is the idea against the Mew decks, and it still can do that. We're seeing more and more that it's not as easy to do, or not as sort of flawless of an answer to these Mew decks as we go forward, but I think it's the best the deck can do right. Unfortunately, 300 HP is a very, very scary for the deck. Now they have Choice Belt because it means that you're well within range, to be honest. But yeah, enough Marnie path crumbing people is going to get you there. 1 fan of Waves, probably also helping out with the tempo here and there. But yeah, pretty interesting stuff. Again, it just feels like no one was respecting any of these sniping decks, so because of that, no one was really respecting Jolteon. No one was playing Manaphy, and therefore Jolteon was able to do well. I think Jolteon will probably be quite popular over the next couple of days. Its success will somewhat drop off a cliff if people see this and just decide to re-find that space for Metaphy. And then in a couple of weeks' time, when people see that Jolteon isn't doing very well anymore, they'll drop the Metaphy and Jolteon will come back. It's the same with all of these decks. It was the same with Decidueye back in the day. All that kind of stuff. It was the same with sniping decks back in the day when Mew was in format. So yeah, same with Baby Blats, or I guess Big Blounds and Tapu Fini. All of these one-card counters to these decks sort of are in a bit of a wave pattern. Sometimes they're played and the decks do badly. Sometimes they're not played and the decks do well. And I think that's exactly what happened here. But really interesting seeing someone was happy enough to play this and really did well with it. So yeah, definitely keep it in mind for Salt Lake City and Liverpool over the next couple of weeks. And then finally, the Dominican Blown was the final tournament to look at from yesterday. This tournament, again, had a top 16 cut with a lot of Arceus. Only 2 Mew made the top 16, and neither of them made top 8. I think this might be one of the first tournaments where Mew has not made a top 8. I'll have to fact check that. But yeah, pretty interesting stuff. A lot of Arceus. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Arceus decks in the top 16 as well. So yeah, it really was an Arceus fest, to be honest. And the tournament was won overall by an Arceus Inteleon with a couple of spicy techs. We've got the Cry of Destruction Yveltal. Again, we've seen this kind of added in here and there to try and be a counter to Mew. As well as the Galarian Zapdos. Not playing the Dunsparce, maybe hoping that a lot of people would cut it, or a lot of people would not necessarily pop it down against you in the Arceus mirror, and then all of a sudden you can just get a Zapdos kind of out of nowhere. I feel like, again, without Raihan, in a lot of the mirror matches, you're going to struggle to ever see them have more than 2 V Pokemon down. So it feels a little bit sketchy. But just having it as like an impending threat is pretty interesting. And even if they do play Dunsparce, you can ping it down with Inteleon. Also playing the powerful colourlesses as well. I am a huge fan of Capture, to be honest. So I'm not 100% sure where the additional damage is useful. But I guess you get to a point where Inteleon pings plus Choice Belt plus powerful colourless can maybe push you all the way to 280 with a 3 basic energied or no double turboed Arceus in the mirror. So yeah, pretty interesting stuff. I'm not sold on the Zapdos package personally. I still think people will play Dunsparce, though I know a lot of people have started to cut Dunsparce because Zapdos had dropped off the map. So again, similarly to the whole Manaphy thing, maybe it's time for Zapdos to come back into decks and really trying to punish some of these Arceus decks that aren't playing Dunsparce anymore. But yeah, pretty interesting stuff. That was a lot of talking. That was a lot of lists. I tried to go through as quickly as possible, but obviously there were a lot of tournaments to analyse this week, so forgive me if it wasn't too speedy. But other than that, I will not drag things out too much more. Thank you very much for watching. I've been Jack from Omnipoke, and I look forward to seeing you guys in another video soon. Cheers, everyone.